Hello everyone, so welcome back to English Law. This is a video about theft. Well, look at the Theft Act, section 1.1. It says, a person is guilty of theft if he dishonestly appropriates property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. So that's the end of the quotation. So first of all, we've got to appropriate someone's property, to take it. And then you've got to do it dishonestly. So you're doing it without permission, you're not buying it, something like that. It's got to be property, it's got to be a thing which is capable of being owned. It could be a wallet, could be a car, could be a jacket, could be cash. There are other things it can't be. If it's, let me see, air is not property, something like that. Water flowing out of a stream or something like if it's that's not property. Things which we will reasonably consider to be refuse, they have thrown away. Things which are lost and that one couldn't ascertain to whom they belong, things like that. Okay, so and then it's got to belong to another. You can't be stealing your own property, and you must intend to permanently deprive that other person of the property. If you intend to return it, then that's not theft. But the thing is, return it in what time scale? Because permanently doesn't mean literally that. If you to return it 50 years later, well, sorry, that would still be theft. Okay. Then we've got to go on to see what look more into an appropriation. So section 3.1 says, any assumption by a person of the rights of an owner amounts to an appropriation. So assuming proprietary rights, there was a case where a chap in the shop, he went up and he swapped the price labels and he brought the item to the till, and he was going to attempt to pay the lower price, because he put a lower price than it really was on it. And now he could say, well, I didn't steal it, I was just attempting to buy it, for lower than the advertised price. But that was held to be theft. He didn't manage to buy it for lower than the proper price, but they still said that was theft because you were assuming proprietary rights over it by changing the price labels. That was R against Morris, 1983. Offering for sale can be appropriation, can be theft in R against Pitham and Hell, Hehl, I think it's pronounced Hell. Is it Hell? 1976. So offering to sell something which doesn't belong to you, and the owner has not granted you permission, is not asking you to act as a salesman on his behalf. So wrecking or destroying property, that's also assuming proprietary right. That can be theft. So anyway, for R against Morris, yes. So appropriation and consent. Well, if someone gives permission, then that's different. This came up in R against Gomez, about 1983. Was permission granted to sell certain white goods like a washing machine or a dryer, things like that. White goods are so called because they usually come in white, like fridges and freezers and such like, even if they're not actually white. Sometimes they're silver or black or whatever. So appropriation with consent is different. Lord Brown Wilkinson held this. I regard the word appropriation in isolation as being an objective description of the act done, irrespective of the mental state of either the owner or the accused. Close quotation. Now, it seems faintly wrong to me, so not what was in the mind of the parties, but what would a reasonable man believe in this situation. But what if I believed I had permission or something like that? Well, Brown Wilkins says that's surplusage, so it doesn't count. Okay. So remember the Theft Act, the various items: appropriating property belonging to another dishonestly with the intention of permanently depriving the other person of it. So there are 6 criteria. Every single criterion must be fulfilled or it's not theft. Okay, can you steal gifts? Well, they looked into that in R against Hinks in 2000. Well, section 3.1 of the Theft Act says, any assumption by a person of the rights of the owner amounts to an appropriation, and this includes where he comes by the property without stealing it. Any later assumption of the right by keeping it or dealing with it as owner. That's the end of the quotation. If you borrow something with permission but don't give it back when you're supposed to, that would still be theft because you were given it honestly and you did not actually steal it. But by failing to return it on time, that can become theft. So continuing appropriation, R against Hale, 1978, was about that. Well, let's look at someone who purchased things innocently. In the Theft Act, Section 3.2 says, where property or a right or interest in property is or purports to be transferred for value to a person acting in good faith, no later assumption by him of rights which he believed himself to be acquiring shall, by reason of any defect in the transferor's title, amount to theft of property. Close quotation. So, supposing bad man steals an item, bad man sells it to me, I believe that bad man is the rightful owner of it, so I pay for it and I receive it, so I think I own it. It turns out bad man had no legal title to it, therefore it's confiscated from me and it goes back to its rightful owner. But I am not regarded as a thief because I bought it in good faith, genuinely believing that bad man had legal title and was legally permitted to sell it to me. As R against Adams 1993 was a case about that. So let's look at this belonging to another aspect of theft. Section 5.1 says, property shall be regarded as belonging to any person having possession or control of it, or having any proprietary right or interest. Close quotation. So even if you don't actually own it, but you have possession of it because you've hired it or something like that, if somebody steals it from the person who's hired a car, well, that's still theft. Well, it's also theft from the company which owns it, things like that. There's what if you find something which is abandoned, which is wild, and I start treating my property? Yes, that's acceptable, and someone who takes it off me would still be stealing it. So R against Turner number 2, 1971, it's about this. So abandoned property, Williams against Phillips, 1957. If property is abandoned and it can be reasonably assumed that the owner no longer wants it, just dumped it, left it for anyone to take. You sometimes see old suitcases just left out on the street. Sometimes even a note in front of the house saying, take whatever you want. Sometimes there's not. But in some circumstances, it might be regarded as permissible to take this. Clearly nobody wants it. Hibbert against McKiernan, 1948, is a similar case. So remember, those having control of it, if you take it from those who have control of it, even though they're not the legal owners, that would still be theft. Section 5.1 says, property belongs to those having possession or control. R against Woodman, 1974, is that. What if you get a feral animal to come to your door by feeding all the time? You might have to be said to have control of it, even if you don't actually own it. So somebody then seizing that cat you've left a saucer of milk out for might be seen as stealing it. Parker against British Airways, born 1982, is about theft when there was some degree of control over property. Section 5.3 says, where a person receives property from or on account of another, and is under an obligation to retain and deal with that property or its proceeds in a particular way, the property or proceeds shall be regarded as against him as belonging to the other. Close quotation. So someone has control of it but doesn't actually own it, has to manage somebody's funds, for example, so it has to pay to deliver a car or whatever it is, pay to deliver a package, then he must not treat it as his own. He must deal honestly, be a faithful servant, and deliver it as he's supposed to do, or that's theft. There's an obligation to deal with property in a certain way, and this is legally binding, as in R against Clowes, number 2, 1994, or Davidge against Bunnett, 1984. So property or its proceeds, things that come from it, like in R against Wayne, 1995. So this legal obligation arises in certain situations. It's often contractually based. R against Hall, 1972 would be an example. R against Klinenberg and Marsden, 1999 is another example. So there's section 5.4 of the Theft Act says, where a person gets property by another's mistake and is under an obligation to make restoration in whole or in part of the property or its proceeds or the value thereof, then to the extent of that obligation, the property or proceeds shall be regarded as against him as belonging to a person entitled to restoration, and an intention not to make restoration shall be regarded accordingly as an intention to deprive that person of the property or the proceeds. Close quotation. So sometimes a person is legally obliged to return whatever item it was, and they must do so. If someone gives you something by mistake, you must give it back. There were cases like this with banks when someone was accidentally paid £100,000. They thought, I'll just keep still and keep it. No, you've got to pay it back. Moynes and Cooper, 1956, is a case about this. So section 5.4 says, I think I've already read that one, sorry. So if property is given by mistake and there's an obligation to make restoration, that comes under section 5.4. So this is operative, and the property must be seen as belonging to the person who is entitled to have it restored to him. So section 5.4 was also pertinent in the Attorney General's reference number 1 of 1983. Mistake. There's another way of dealing with this. R against Shadrock Sigari in 1988, or Chase Manhattan Bank against Israel British Bank London Limited 1981, when there was a similar situation. So Edis against Din in 1976 was a similar case to do with filling up your car at the petrol station. So something belonged to another, a dishonest intention was formed. So then this amounted to theft. So Corcoran and Wendt 1977 is another leading case here. So what if someone eats food at a restaurant? Is that property? They eat it. Well, who owns it at that point? Well, the person. The ownership of the food has passed. It's no longer property. They decide at that point. So a dishonest intention is being formed if you decide you're not going to pay for it. How do we know if property belongs to another? An owner can't be stealing his own property, as in R against Turner. Abandoned property is not stealing. If someone has control of property, you could still be stealing it from him. That's an R against Woodman or Parker against British Airways Board. There's also section 5.3 says if property is given for a certain purpose, it must be used for that purpose. If property is given by mistake, then it must be given back. And what's critical here is the time at which ownership passes to another person. So what's appropriation? It's assuming any proprietorial rights, as in R against Morris. Whether consent is granted or not is not pertinent, as in R against Gomes. Gifts are another matter, as in R against Hinks. So there can be later appropriation as per section 3.1, and innocent purchasers are not regarded as thieves, as in section 3.2. So please subscribe to my channel and book online lessons with me in law and many other subjects. Toodle pip.